Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, So What? Evolving from Social Data to Social Intelligence. Your hosts today are Adam Bambrough, VP of Client Services in North America for Brandwatch.
Hi there.
And he is joined by our guest, Susan Etlinger, an industry analyst for the Altimeter Group.
Hi, everybody.
So some of the things that we'll cover today as we move through this session will be some trends and best practices around social data and social intelligence, and how some companies are organizing for social, including the role of the social command center in that. And then we'll follow on with a Q&A between our speakers, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end with the audience. Along those lines, don't be shy. We absolutely would love your participation. You can do that in a few different ways. You can tweet at us using the hashtag Brandwatch and the hashtag BrandwatchTips. You can also tweet at our presenters today, and you can see their Twitter handles there, Special Ad and at Etlinger. And you can also ask questions through the GoToWebinar interface, and we will answer those at the end. We will be recording the session today, and we will make the recording and the slides available to you within probably about 2 days after this. So be on the lookout for an email from us then. So Adam now is just going to tell you a little bit about Brandwatch before we get started.
Great, thanks, Drew. So for those that are new to Brandwatch, a very quick introduction of who we are. We work with over 1,000 brands across 15 markets. We have a little over 30% of the Fortune 100 that are powered in some way by Brandwatch data, and we are headquartered in the UK. We're doing this webinar from New York, from our US kind of main office. 220 employees plus, that's growing at about 2 a week at the moment. And we work across a bunch of territories. So we have physical spaces in New York, west coast of the US, Brighton, UK, and also several offices in Germany as well. We're growing last year at 137% year on year, and we do things a little bit differently. And one of the big things as part of that is the way that we innovate. So whilst traditionally vendors release every 3 months, it's kind of average, we've hit 20 over the last 2 years. So we try and move as quickly as the market. I'm going to move on without further ado, hand over to Susan.
Good morning or good afternoon, based on where you are. I am Susan Etlinger. I'm an industry analyst at Altimeter Group. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some recent research that we've done at Altimeter Group, looking at a number of different things. One is sort of this notion of social data intelligence, which is really about the ability to extract meaningful insight at scale from social data. And that has a lot to do also with the ability of social data to be integrated with other significant signals within the business. Several months ago, I started working on a report that was about this idea of the command center. And what started me on it was that, both Brandwatch and actually Salesforce had announced purpose-built command center products within several months of each other. And I started thinking about this idea of the command center and whether it was really still kind of relevant, frankly. And so I started to interview a number of companies and think about how they were using social data and how they were organizing, more importantly, around social data. And as I did that, I started thinking back in terms of some of the history of where we've come. And so when you think about it, there's really this sort of shift from, about 2006 to where we are today. And if you think back to the olden days of 2006, it was really a lot about community in the sort of social media world. It was about building community, building meaningful relationships. And we saw organizations organize around that, specifically really around blogging more than anything else. And so what they started to do was sort of hire these community managers who would help them kind of reach out to people. And if you think about, what happened then, once that was happening, we start seeing, right around 2008, 2009, a couple things happen. One thing that happens, of course, is that we have a global economic recession. So there's a lot more emphasis on the economics, really, and on justifying and on ROI starting to pop up. And so we start seeing the beginnings of this new role called the social business strategist or the social media strategist, which is really how it started. We start seeing command centers launch. We see Dell launch the first one. We see, Gatorade and various other companies launch them. We start seeing these centers of excellence pop up. We start seeing a lot more focus on not only listening, but engagement and also publishing. And so the role that kind of becomes the core role there is the social strategist. And then in the last couple of years, we haven't entirely answered the ROI question because there's so many different signals in the business and there's so many different platforms and there are a lot of sort of technical gaps in terms of what we're able to know. But we have some pretty good processes to do that. But at the same time, there's also been a shift from sort of, how are we converting to a lingering question as to what insight can we start to glean from all of this information. What we're starting to see now is, of course, a greater focus on analytics, a greater focus on social data as a separate kind of discipline, and in some cases even data scientists, and in those cases the data scientists are actually taking social data and comparing it to other enterprise data. It's gotten to be kind of an interesting dynamic because at the same time we've also found that at least 13 departments are actively engaged in social media. And I'll tell you anecdotally from our work and from other things that we're seeing in the industry that it's more. And the engagement in social media and with social data is deepening from just sort of passive observation to actual back and forth engagement and extracting insights and making decisions. And so, we work with a number of companies, as does Brandwatch, that are actively looking at how they can take those social insights and actually make them relevant and make them actionable within the organization. And, we're looking at things like social recruiting and social selling, and, obviously the marketing suite is heavily involved in social, which is now actually merging into digital or become a sort of a function of digital transformation, which my colleague Brian Solis has written about. But we're also seeing it in IT, we're seeing it in legal, we're seeing it in market research. It's really everywhere. So then, the ecosystem that's built up around it is quite interesting. And so I want to sort of, show you kind of a broad view of where this is going, because if you think about social data, really a lot of people sort of think about what's in this lower left corner in the little black box, which is listening and monitoring, maybe a little bit of engagement. But, if we start from the top and kind of think about where all of this can go, the group that we have called publishers, which would be social networks like Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Tumblr, communities such as those that, Lithium and Jive power, so that would be like Sephora and FICO, the credit rating agency, and, Verizon and all sorts of other purpose-built or brand-focused communities. And then we also see enterprise collaboration like Chatter and Yammer. All of that is social data, community data, enterprise collab data, social network data. So that's kind of the universe of social data. And then there are these sort of social data platforms, or social data actually resellers is probably a better way to look at it, in which you see companies like GNIP, which has now been acquired by Twitter, and then you see DataSift, which are actively reselling social data, and then making that available to social data platforms such as Brandwatch and others. And then on the left side of the screen, we see social applications. So, kind of the classic view of what's happening in social, which is listening, engagement, publishing, /content, and analytics. And then on the right, we see all the enterprise stuff. So we see, and obviously this isn't anywhere near an exhaustive list, but we see what can we learn about our customers based on social? How can we integrate that with CRM so we have a communal view or holistic view? My colleague Andrew Jones has just written a book on social identity, which is really focused on, how can we understand who people are in the universe outside our own enterprise walls? And we also look at market research, because if you think about the traditional modes of market research, meaning like surveys and focus groups, those tend to skew much older. You can miss people who are looking at signals on a web browser, for example, as opposed to coming in for a focus group or actually filling out a survey in a hotel or a restaurant or anywhere else they might be, or even online. We see email marketing. We're even seeing it in fraud detection and risk management. Symantec has a wonderful example of that, where they're actually using social data to help them find instances of illegal downloads of their products, and even into supply chain. And, it's going to go into sensor data and everything else. Social data has become really an enterprise asset. So now, when we look at the use cases for command centers, it's kind of, if we think about that mapping back to those 13 departments, or probably even 20 departments, at some point we'll even see it being pervading the enterprise entirely. We look at sort of the different use cases and notice that, when you think about the ways in which brands are using social data, It doesn't mean they have to do all of these things. You know, some of the case studies that we were able to put together for the report were very content focused. For example, there was one that was highly content focused from MasterCard, which I'll show you. And then some of them are much more engagement focused. So for example, eBay, which I did not include in this deck, but it's in the report, is really about making buyers and sellers happy and kind of continuing to keep the balance between the buyers and sellers and extracting insights that will help them kind of smooth that process. So, you know, I added routing and triage, even though you would think that that is part of at least engagement, because what we've noticed is that in many cases, a social media command center or a social media center of excellence, or whatever it is that you want to call that function or that group of people who's deeply engaged in social, you know, there are challenges sometimes in terms of making that data available broadly within the organization. And certainly a lot of focus from the most kind of sophisticated organizations on how we can make it available and in the right form to the people who need it at the time that they need it. So that's kind of the way that the industry is evolving. Now let me talk a little bit about MasterCard, because this is pretty interesting. You know, when you think about a center of excellence or a command center as an example, it's sort of, you know, one of the things we thought about when we were putting the report together was it's sort of neither command nor center, because so it's completely kind of almost the wrong word for it or the wrong phrase for it, because it's not commanding anything. It's not telling people what to do. It's simply facilitating a process of getting information to the right place. And in many cases, it's not a center at all. It's a virtual, or it's a combination of a physical space and a virtual space, in which, you know, somebody in HR is not sitting in a social media command center, but they are getting reports or they have dashboard access. But this case, in terms of MasterCard, is quite interesting because it's very focused use case or case study. It's in their headquarters building, which is in Westchester, New York. It's in a beautiful IMPay designed building, and it's in this wonderful open atrium area. And actually, there's this gigantic monitor. And what happens is people do come and they do spend time and they have meetings there. They find excuses to have meetings there. And they've structured it based on conversation monitoring, but also, most importantly, because MasterCard has a very, you know, it's electronic payment, so it has a very kind of intangible product. They focus it on content, on trying to kind of extend the brand and extend the conversation about what electronic payments means. So it's very much a communications function. And then in terms of benefits, what they've seen really kind of at the top line is a lot more organizational alignment around sort of the mission of the company. So it's had both an internal and an external benefit. They've also saved quite a bit of money on technology just because they've been able to kind of weed out some things that weren't working for them very well. Their content is performing better because they have better insight in terms of that. And then they're doing a lot of decision making, not only in the communications team, but broadly across the organization based on that data. So the idea here, and also in the next case study that you'll see from Wells Fargo, is around expanding the access to the data. And actually, when I interviewed Renee Brown, who was the head of the center at Wells Fargo, and I asked her, you know, who are your stakeholders in the organization, her answer was, you know, it would actually be easier for me to tell you who our stakeholders aren't, because we have so many people in the business who are involved in social data and involved in using this data. So they use it as an early alert system. If you actually think back to that, those phases from the earlier slide, you know, Wells Fargo kind of entirely missed that whole community phase of social media. And, you know, it's funny because a lot of times financial services companies or pharma, who are both highly regulated, will say, oh, you know, we've gotten a late start and we weren't really, you know, we were just too concerned about some of the benefits or some of the impacts of engaging in social. But when you think about it, it's completely strategic for them to have missed that phase, because frankly they needed the governance in place and they needed the processes and the guardrails and the regulatory protections in place to ensure that they were actually doing the right thing. And of course, both pharma and financial services have very considerable consumer protection, investor protection, and patient protection requirements that they need to meet that are quite, that can be quite complex when you're looking at something as dynamic and fast-moving as social data. So this is an early alert system for them. It's routing and triage. But the one thing that you need to understand about it, is, aside from the fact that it is both a physical and a virtual space, is that it is really intended to be a service to the business. The main benefit really is around insight and around speed to market. They're really able to use that data in very strategic ways to understand what's happening kind of at the front line of customer and other kind of community interests. And they're also using it, of course, for customer service. And so the idea is that over time you start to train your people not only to understand the data, but to act on the data in ways that are supportive and reflective and in line with regulatory requirements. But the most important thing here is really my favorite thing that Renee said, which is build your command center like a business. And that means having a business case. It means having budgets. It means thinking through all of these issues very, very holistically. That was something really, really critical. Now, when we think about the future in terms of a more holistic strategy for social, I talked about the integration with other enterprise data. This is a complex framework, so I just want to break it down for you. The 4 stages of social data intelligence, as we, based on the interviews that we did with many, many companies, start with a sort of ad hoc, meaning that it's really an experimental phase. You're learning, you're sort of getting people together. A lot of companies are at this stage or sort of at the more mature level of ad hoc, and they're starting to formalize some of their metrics. They're starting to use social data beyond just a couple of different groups. They're starting to figure out what benchmarks look like and what sort of normal looks like when you're thinking about volumes and sentiment and top conversation drivers and stuff. They are putting together governance processes to try to figure out, what are people's responsibilities when it comes to this data, and then defining their metrics. But when you move into stage 2, you get more formalization, and really the main piece here is that you're starting to map that social data to business strategy. So it's not so much about engagements and sentiments and volumes and reach and all that stuff. It's about what that does for your business. Does it help you acquire new audiences or new customers? Does it help in call deflection and cost reduction? Does it help in risk management? Does it help improve the customer experience in a measurable way? What does it look like in terms of funnel stages? Does it increase awareness? Does it increase consideration? Does it assist in conversion in some way that you can detect, either with tagging or other strategies? And then when you get into integrated, it's, okay, great, we've got social. But now let's look at social and see how it compares to market research, business intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. And then most companies who are really sophisticated now kind of hover in that stage 3 area where they are actually integrating social data. But the challenge is, and this is something that many companies are trying to address, is how do you do that at scale? Because you obviously cannot manually classify millions of posts per month. Brandwatch does have some capabilities in this area with regard to classification, which is a really good step. And at the same time, though, there are a lot of other pieces that are going to need to move to scale for organizations to move into that holistic phase. And it's not just, frankly, about technology. It's about the organizational kind of strategic use of social data. So with that, I'm just going to move into some quick recommendations about sort of how to think about this. The first piece is to be really focused on what you're trying to accomplish. This is not about volume increases. This is about how are you going to serve the business. This is also, what are you going to do and what are you not going to do? What can you solve and what can't you solve? You need to have sponsorship at a high level. This is the absolute hallmark of success. Otherwise, a lot of times the grassroots stuff tends to falter when it comes time for budgeting, especially now. You need to make that data available to people, and if you can't make it available immediately because you're dealing with, licensing or other kinds of budget issues, or you haven't gotten everybody sort of up and running yet, you do need to build a roadmap for that and some expectations around it. You need to prioritize your insights, figure out what can you know and what can you not know, focus on data that can inform your strategy. There are a lot of things you can measure. You can absolutely boil the ocean with social data, but it will not get you anywhere. The other thing is it's really important to think about visuals, and Adam and I are going to talk a little bit about visual stuff and photos and images and video a little bit later. And then also, this came from the gentleman at eBay, and he said, think about it as agile development. Think big, move fast, be willing to break some stuff, not too much, but enough that at least you can start to, make quick progress because as Adam said earlier, we're moving very quickly in this industry. My last words for you are to think beyond social and think about social as an enabler of the business, but not the only driver. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Adam, and he's going to talk for a bit, and then we're going to Q&A.
Fantastic. Thanks, Susan. First of all, we actually talked to this quite a lot, this different stages of organising for social across the enterprise, and we've, funnily enough, seen almost kind of an overlap and kind of interplay between stage 2 and stage 3, specifically around command centres or centres of excellence, where often it's been a case of kind of social has organically kind of built out from measurement teams, from what started off in community and marketing, and then there's kind of developed interest on a more informal and, to your stage 1 of the other slide, kind of ad hoc basis to different business units. And that's either led to, first off, that kind of social strategy piece, and then all that's been in place, and then the kind of evolution has been to command center and having that kind of physical setup, or exactly as per this chain. So I just thought it was really interesting to kind of look at that and see the different ways from, I guess, a vendor perspective. This has kind of played out over the last year or so for us as well. In terms of some specific use cases that we've seen, where I guess I would see this as social data turning into more social intelligence. I wanted to pull out a few examples. We don't quite hit the 13 categories from Susan's earlier slide, but I think we do potentially add 1 or 2 to that as well. So to touch on some of these, so around kind of different, I guess more non-traditional business units, where social we've seen being used to add insights around kind of product and product development. Customer insights we've seen filling some gaps actually. So one really interesting use case is where, for instance, there will be a really accurate, really relevant, in fact down to SKU level kind of feedback from review sites. So it's not a slice of everyone that will leave a review, but it's really accurate data. We found that kind of product managers have a gap pre those review sites. So where there's people talking about the run-up, if they've received a first run, when they're talking about receiving something in that kind of gap before they actually place a review, we've found kind of people going in, clients going in and getting some really valuable insights, because then even if it's a packaging tweak or a messaging tweak that can be fed back in the early cycle, there's huge benefits from that. And a really interesting use case, I think. Around kind of distribution and operations, demand forecasting, we've had now clients building models based on year-over-year kind of pick up of chatter pre-release to actually look at kind of products and how that's going to kind of spread out. And supply chain insights with teams that are separated by a retail channel, for instance, that is a little bit out of their control. An interesting way to kind of get feedback as to how that supply chain is kind of positioning, delivering, etc. as well. Susan touched on earlier some of the social selling factors that we've seen inside sales, and we've seen that getting a bit more sophisticated and almost like I guess a shift towards social selling as being more on the periphery to a core strategy. And in fact, we're a good example of this as a company, and this is our first base. We find that we can add more value and therefore engage with people that might be clients of ours in the future in a more, I guess, productive way than picking up the phone and kind of haranguing or kind of that more kind of cold call. So I think we're a good example of that. Other stuff kind of on an aside, landscape analysis we talk about, not just in terms of competitor overviews and literally brand versus brand mentions, but more kind of white space, what else is happening in our particular vertical, in our industry, with the type of people that we expect our customers to be to form then strategic insights and help make decisions about messaging and product releases and campaigns, etc. Timing, a lot of insight from that. And then with customer service, which is obviously a pretty traditional, I say traditional, for the last few years, they counted traditional in social, is a well-known use case. We're seeing some more kind of levels of intelligence above that in terms of monitoring the nuances of how that's being delivered and how that's being received as well. So kind of insights into that customer care. And then the final piece I wanted to highlight was more around kind of internal business support. So whether it's kind of candidate search and identifying people that might, in the way they present themselves, be a good fit for the future, to then across larger enterprises even tracking people that are self-identifying as employees and getting this different kind of view of how they're, whether it's how they're feeling, how they're talking about brand, a few different perspectives, but I guess the leading point is it's that kind of eye on that channel basically. So one thing from, I guess, a vendor perspective that we get a really good view on is diversity. So diversity of needs from what needs to come from social, diversity of objectives, and diversity of challenges as well. And that kind of plays into the way we've ended up building Brandwatch. I guess it's quite attractive as a prospect to make something where there's a really straightforward user journey, one purpose, and make it really easy for people to get to that. We kind of took a different approach in terms of understanding that there's more subtleties in what people need to feed into their different business units across the enterprise. We've been doing that for a long time with Brandwatch and making it very flexible, and it's actually kind of one of the leading decisions behind Visio, which is what we brought to market for this kind of command center and visual layer inside that kind of social ecosystem. And to talk to this with some more kind of real examples, I thought this is an interesting one to bring up to kind of talk about a structure which is global. So in this case, leading CPG with quite a kind of unique challenge. So one in terms of size and scale. So here we're representing brand teams, and this is just a small sample. There could be hundreds of brand teams needing to be led by and also kind of feedback into some central teams. So in this case, research, crisis, and social media. That's something that we kind of pulled out here. With the kind of exec or corporate view of that. All of these needing to be really different kind of curated feeds to actually make sense. So whilst the information going out to each brand team, it might be relevant to understand things like share of voice or campaign measurement related to that brand when an action takes place that, for instance, gets flagged to crisis. We see that kind of need to then funnel that intelligently. So that curated view is then the same kind of view that feeds out to C-suite, to corporate, to understand about that. And similarly, the kind of central team can then feed back to that kind of extra hub team, where, for instance, it might be PR or brand or both, or any different business units that kind of get together to kind of resolve and look at that and deal with that in a cohesive way. One other theme that we found behind this, and I actually really love the phrase that one of our clients kind of brought to us actually at a recent kind of event, and that phrase is talking about this social data as one source of truth. So that's incredibly important, that the concept of any data flowing through a business, you just wouldn't see sales data flowing through to different business units and represented differently. Whereas with the traditional kind of more ad hoc and more siloed approach that has kind of just organically come from social, where there might be different vendors involved, different sources, different reads, different measurements on categorization or sentiment, that kind of, I guess, investment in or belief in, I would say, that one source of truth is absolutely key to then leading to making business decisions. Otherwise, you have conflicting or parallel kind of feeds which make it a really difficult platform to start off with. The second use case, I actually wanted to do this, and I kind of used an amalgam of a lot of clients that we've worked with in this particular space, as opposed to focusing on one. But I think there's enough similarity of kind of story to tell this in a meaningful way, and to use some kind of examples within this particular organisation or type of organisation where social data can be turned into meaningful kind of intelligence and insight. Let's go through a few of these actually. So within team looking after, for instance, mobile apps and web, we've seen examples where social has formed a channel to learn about things like site frustrations and user experience, and picking up on those kind of as in a way to kind of supplement any kind of web data, and also that competitive set. So if you have one FinServ company releasing one mobile app, but they're monitoring conversation around apps of others, you can then pick up on what those users are kind of aligned with, what they love, what they hate, for kind of smarter kind of integration processes in the future, or development processes in the future. Within technical, I love this quote actually from one of our European clients, and I apologise in advance for any offence to my German colleagues with any mispronunciation, but for Sparkassen inside Europe, had this quote about them learning around their ATM reliability. If a cash machine or an ATM is actually broken, they learnt that from social, but before they actually get that from technical. So that's a really interesting kind of use case, and that's obviously real, tangible, immediate, high priority kind of business value coming from this channel. Within PR, you can obviously have an immediate reaction. So whatever that kind of release might be around, you can judge immediate pick-up tone to then inform messaging. If it's being misinterpreted, if it's spreading in the wrong way, then you can get real-time feedback to then amend that. And that might not be an amend that goes out via a social channel, but it's informing that business unit that's going to put it out through whichever channel. In a slightly different tack, if there is something that's picking up, whether it's positive or negative, decisions around whether and how to address that based on the actual velocity of conversation is a huge and super valuable kind of intelligence insight there as well. So the final one to touch on around customer care, there's a huge amount. So the initial kind of routing and triage is just a classic kind of use case around social data and the way it can be categorized. But looking above that, you can look at not just those individual conversations, but kind of level up to those conversations as a whole to pull out topics, and then see kind of opportunities and pain points that might not be addressed at a customer service level, but might want to then be passed up to product, to website, to wherever those kind of conversations can be influenced by to kind of make those clients happier in the first place. And obviously simple measures around happiness, be it sentiment, etc. I thought a very, very quick dive into the piece of Susan's slide that kind of filled that left-hand corner in the kind of ecosystem would be valid at this stage. I'm going to jump onto some examples. As a quick kind of check against that social operating system, the way that we kind of view that is at the heart, listening and analytics. This should be that kind of one source of truth. This is the data, the raw data as it is, and this is where deep dives can happen once insights are found, and things like categorization of data takes place. The loop then between that and engagement and publishing is really important. So to have two-way feedback, so there's not obviously insights coming from that data and that analytics, but insights then from the reaction and from content going out. It needs to feed back to see how that's changed the dial, or if that's kind of moved the dial, and kind of feedback to inform future stuff. Workflow is really important as well. If you have a large team, at this stage, obviously you need to be thinking about that massive conversation Susan touched on, the enormous volume, which is something we work a lot with clients to kind of address and turn that giant volume into something that's meaningful, relevant, and you have the right conversations and the right people being addressed by, again, the right people in the organisation. And then that final part, in terms of the technology stack, I can't stress any more the importance of that visual layer. To reference back to Susan's report, whilst you can have the shiny, and the shiny is no doubt important, that kind of impressive visuals will also get into more places, so it will pull more attention from those stakeholders that might have been a bit more resistant about building this into their reporting and collaborating, feeding back, and that visual layer can open up more in a way that isn't as suited to social data. So if you have social data that's been presented in PowerPoint reports before, you kind of lose a lot of that real-time enormous differentiator and benefit that comes with the way that social works. And then this is underplaying the extra layers that sit on top of it, but there's obviously a giant amount of kind of think about pieces around that kind of command center implementation piece. I'm going to run through this quickly, so we'll jump on the Q&A and get some value for you guys out of this. I just wanted to talk to some real-world examples of the kind of so what's, I guess. So one instance that we've been finding popping up more and more, both embedded in clients, or for this example, this is around Super Bowl, picture courtesy of Adweek, and this is around a Jaguar kind of commercial going out live. A bunch of benefits here in terms of collaborating between different agencies, kind of client stakeholders, real-time content creation that's happening on the fly and is visible and not scary because people can see what's going on. And this is use cases coming up a lot more around either campaign or event or kind of crisis as well. Situations where it's really it's a really good fit. Another example is a client that we're really pleased to work with, and this fits very much into that kind of customer view slide that Susan brought up earlier with MoneyGram, where MoneyGram are for 2017 kind of diversifying or moving into more self-service channels. So for those guys, they're really acutely aware how important that kind of voice of customer is. So understanding what those customers are saying, the better they understand them, the smarter the business decisions they can make around the way they roll out products, identify trends, and just actually build up services and how they support those needs as well. And this was a really recent kind of release. And then the final kind of touch point is around that kind of FinServe amalgamation, this kind of model, so where Command Center fits into those different business cases before. So you have that, per Susan's example, really important visibility of routing and triage, and where data alone and metadata can't make as accurate a kind of decision to segment out. You have kind of those people first making important decisions that need to be timely decisions as well. Around the engagement piece, again, you have that kind of people first, a lot of eyes on the screen to identify stuff that's important around customer service, tone pieces, where you have those kind of red flags around ATM, etc. And you have those, you have people in one space so they can kind of collaborate against responses as well. And then reporting back in, so reporting back into individual business units with analysis and trends. So if you're looking kind of a step above conversations today or share of voice today to issues around things like experience, we used that example before around ATMs, you have this team with kind of this full view of this wider set, so not just branded but white space and external, to kind of provide those kind of higher level trends, whether it's across the enterprise or to the C-suite or any kind of combination. And then just to kind of recap, I guess the so what's that I and we have kind of seen in Command Center's kind of piece in this evolution of social data. So collaboration, I can't understate it, and we've seen a similar thing to Susan's mentioned around this kind of propensity to gather with organizations within Command Center spaces for different teams that may not have kind of been paying necessarily the same amount of attention to that social data. Having it as a tangible physical thing, it's a place, has been a really strong point in pulling teams together. Visibility, the fact that everything is real time and it's in front of important people at the right time is incredibly important. The consistency angle and kind of emphasizing that one source of truth. Once you have a Command Center environment with business heads having meetings there, it's really hard to get away from that kind of, or hide away that kind of question that there might be parallel data sets and kind of different answers that different business teams are being fed. So it really kind of unifies that really important aspect. Making all that data available as it happens as well has been incredibly useful. We have teams, we have a case study coming out in a week or two to watch out for, with where a team has literally, they have their content creation team are sitting in front of the screen and they're being informed as topics evolve, picking up on what's interesting within their audience set, around their marketing campaigns, their ad campaigns, and all that's literally based on visualizations that kind of pull up stuff that their audience cares about, so they know what's going to resonate kind of before just putting it out there and seeing what it happens. So it's a smart way to do it. That physical hub, incredibly important to pull people together. We touched on that. And I think the aspect of making a statement by investing in kind of a command center or command centers, whatever that kind of manifestation might be, whether that's visualizations outside the C-suite and a control center inside an org, or kiosks at key retail locations, whatever that looks like. I think it makes a statement that that voice of the customer, that customer kind of opinion, what's happening, you have that pulse that's kind of front of mind. And that's interesting, I think, and powerful internally and to the wider world as well. And I think that's why command centers, the shiny part of it, definitely kind of helped garner attention, as we probably know from the amount of times that I'm sure you guys have seen slides around the Dell Command Center, or kind of Obama visiting the American Red Cross. Is powerful stuff. Recommendation-wise, we're completely aligned with Susan, and we had this conversation before the webinar, and that we were pretty much about to put together the same slide. So as opposed to do that, we thought it most relevant to kind of recap back on Susan's, and I think she's done a brilliant job enough of detailing these, so I won't dive in any further. What I do want to do is move on to the Q&A though, with you, Susan.
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple questions for you, Adam, that I'd like to ask, and then if there's anything you want to ask me, I'm happy to answer, and then I'd love to take questions from folks who are listening in. But my first question is this: I'm seeing a lot more focus on visuals lately. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if we look at Facebook, we look at the news feed, photos are getting larger. They're getting larger in Twitter. Obviously, Pinterest and Tumblr are extremely image heavy. What are you seeing, and what are clients asking you guys about sort of, multiple types of data, including images and video?
Yeah, so image has been really big. Probably over, I would say it's probably it's a 12-month cycle roughly, while it's kind of come onto the radar and building into kind of business processes. But I would say more and more so, probably the last 6 months, it's becoming more and more important. And I guess where we are is we totally get the importance. In fact, we put out a report probably about a week ago on different kind of people in the space that are doing different things to look at kind of image recognition. We're committed to kind of pulling that in with what we do. At the moment, actually, interestingly enough, the challenge we've had in not doing that sooner has actually been scaling it. So whilst we focused on text, which is to an extent covered some of the image first kind of opinions in pulling around conversations around kind of official sites, when you then start to say, right, I need to look at 250,000 kind of images where people have posted our brand around the globe, that's where actually the tech piece becomes a bit challenging to do that in a timely way. So see it as super valuable, and I think we can't wait to be kind of doing that and delivering that alongside the kind of text-based insights that we already work with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what else, if you could kind of sum up some of the key questions that clients are asking you in the last, say, 6 months or so, are there new trends popping up, or is it fairly standard, or what are you hearing?
So I think a big thing for us has been as kind of as the data scales within the enterprise, a lot of focus is around the way that's delivered. So I think traditionally vendors like us and many other people kind of have had that piece where we look at the data, getting that as relevant as possible. We look at categorizing it and getting it as, I guess, accurate for different business units, for different people within those business units as possible. But then the actual delivery kind of can stop at this is delivered via email, or this is delivered via a dashboard that you log into. And we've had a lot of kind of clients coming to us and kind of talking about smarter ways that the next steps can kind of happen. So whether it's getting deeper into, or kind of getting them closer to the insight level, or getting them closer to the format where they need to kind of report that out or report it up and kind of get that data kind of shared inside the enterprise. So that delivery, I'd say, has been massive for us in clients kind of, I guess, wanting us to make their lives easier, helping them kind of spend less time on the kind of manual piece. So that's been a big request, I would say, recently.
Great. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, I guess on a kind of bigger picture, I know you kind of alluded to some of the future questions around social intelligence or theories. I'm really interested to hear kind of where you see that intersection of social intelligence and business intelligence to the point where maybe they're not differentiated, or if you see that.
I would love to see that. It would make me happy. You know, I think there are a couple of really practical challenges. One is that social data is really different from classic business intelligence data. It's big data, and I know I just said it. I said the buzzword, but here's why it matters. So big data is made up of three things. If you look at the Gartner kind of definition back from, I think, 1999 even, it's volume, right? There's a lot of it. Velocity, it moves really fast. And the big one, though, is variety, lots of different types. And if you think back to the early days of big data, which are pre-social web, let's just call it that, you would get a lot of things like log files, transactional data. For example, if you think about investments and stock purchases, you know, that's high volume. If you think about like the NASDAQ and the NYSE, high volume, high velocity, fast-moving stock market. When you look at social, and we think about, you know, as we just talked about, photos, GIFs, video, social actions, which are things like likes and shares and retweets that require a button or pin it, you know, pins. And then we think about all of the kind of just human language, natural language that we see in Twitter, that we see in blogs and communities, and then we see the interaction of the structured and the unstructured data. That's where it gets really tough for BI, because they're really used to dealing with structured data and structured data and a finite number of data types. And so now we have an infinite, let's just call it an infinite because it feels infinite, number of data types, all of which are quite different. And if you think about something as simple as like Yelp, for example, or TripAdvisor, the complexity of a 4-star, 5-star review and the commentary, or the complexity of a 1-star review and the commentary and the interplay between those things is actually quite complex. So you could look at a restaurant that gets a 3 or 4-star average rating, and there are going to be 1-star reviews that said the food was amazing, best food I've ever eaten my whole life, but the servers were snobbish and rude. They get 1 star. So, and then the 5 stars could be, you know, fairly easy to understand. But it's the ones actually that are at the lower end sometimes are those mixed ones that are really hard to understand. And I think the difficulty with business intelligence is that, and many actually sort of systems for understanding language, is that, you know, there's sarcasm, there are all the things that we understand from sentiment analysis, but then there's also that interplay of the structured and unstructured. So I think, you know, BI companies are becoming more, they certainly understand the sense of urgency around social data, many of them do, but the question about how you get this very messy, fast-moving mass of social data into something that is comprehensible by BI systems is really the key. So that's why I think things like classification, being able to understand the difference between a customer complaint and a resume submission.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I've actually seen some enormous spreadsheets as we've kind of asked the same questions and tried to overlay the way that kind of data is presented and kind of absorbed against those kind of other enterprise entities. that our clients are spending kind of 80% of their day in, and how we can kind of make that meaningful. I think it's going to be a fun adventure getting close to that point, definitely.
No question. And I'm wondering, if there are any questions from folks listening in, we'd love to answer them.
Yeah, we definitely do. So the first question is actually for you, Susan, going back to something that you mentioned. You named a book about social identity, and someone was questioning what the title was of that.
Oh, yeah, it's my colleague Andrew Jones, and what I'll do is I will tweet on Brandwatch Tips the link to that report, which is free for download.
That's great, thank you. Okay, and our next question is something that Adam had mentioned about the command center being the one source of truth. And the question is, how are brands accepting that attribute if they still believe there's so much noise in social?
I guess maybe I'll be placed to pick that one up from the clients we work with. There's it's kind of interesting, actually. I think there's two sides of that. So there's some kind of politics that will exist, especially at kind of multi-brand organisations in kind of adopting, because there might be some protectiveness over kind of data being exposed that maybe could have been a bit more controlled or curated, to talk about it kindly before. So I think that's one piece that's definitely a challenge. And I think the second is more of a technology standpoint. And this is actually, it's kind of hard to address without going into like a sales mode. But across the kind of marketplace, it's a really big, I don't want to call it a problem because it's an opportunity at the same time. There's no shortage of content, of volume of conversations that can generally be used to talk about kind of a big brand or attributes of that brand. The challenge is generally more having just the most relevant slice of that. And per Susan's note before, it's kind of, or Susan's comment before, it's unstructured, it's conversation, and that conversation is available to vendors in the form of text, which they have to then use kind of techniques to pull out. And it's, I guess it's kind of what we've put at the front of our development is actually allowing people to get to that most relevant kind of set of conversations via the mechanisms inside the platform to get to that. So it's definitely achievable. It's generally not achievable to get to 100% of everything that's relevant 100% of the time, but it's definitely relevant even if you have the most tricky brand name that might just exist in everyday conversation with some tools and techniques to get to relevant conversation enough to have it really insightful and probably not to cause any headaches when you're bringing up that data in those kind of board meetings or management meetings or feeding through to KPIs as well.
Thanks, Adam. So our next question is for you, Susan, and it refers back to your stages of social business evolution. And the person said, my management is sort of anti-social business, and we seem to be stuck in stage one, where they are a bit old school and think marketing is push and outbound only. Is there a better term that they can use to describe where they are?
Is there a better term than ad hoc?
A better term than stage one, where they're not even considering themselves to be in that.
I see. You know, this is a no judgment model framework. And the reason is that, you know, if you were to look at like pharma and if you look at Wells Fargo, let's say 4 years ago, you know, all the social media guru types to be saying, oh, they're not involved in social media, ha, 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 you know, they're not, you know, innovative. And, you know, the reality is here is a company that's actually, you know, being extremely true to the way that it works and what its customers expect of it. Its customers do not expect that it would randomly get involved in social media without a strategy and without governance, because that would actually put investors at risk. You know, and consumers at risk. So it was actually extremely strategic for them to be so early, you know, so sort of supposedly late to the game. I actually think that, you know, when you get to trying to look at the value of social versus the value of not engaging, that's really the place where you start to see some interesting changing of behavior and changing of minds on the executive side, because if you look at organizations that have had a really big social crisis, most of them, that's a very a very clarifying process in terms of really understanding the value of social. If something happens to you and you are out there and you are not out there and you are not able to respond, you know, is there any other part of your business where you would actually not have a crisis plan? And so I think that's a good place to start. But I also, if that person wants to put a few more follow-up questions on Twitter, we can certainly deal with those because I know we're up at the top of the hour.
Okay, great. All right, and as you said, we are at the top of the hour, so anyone who asked questions that we didn't have the chance to follow up with, we will reach out to you after this to answer those. So I want to thank Susan, first of all, as our guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you also to Adam, our host here in Brandwatch, New York. So as I mentioned, we were recording the session. We will follow up with links to that and the slides in just a few days. Thank you very much, everyone.